Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to answer more questions. So I'm going to do a question and answers part 2, which I haven't done for a while. I want to answer some questions that people have asked, and some of these were asked quite a while ago, so I apologize. But they were asked and they needed an answer that was longer than something I just wanted to type really quickly, but they weren't really a whole video. So I waited until I had a few of these. I think I have 4 or 5 of them. And I figured I'd just do one video and knock them all out. So let's start with Kalkser, who asked, what in your time of game development have you broken the rules, as in you had certain standards or typical procedure or process, but you tossed it out the window and found a surprising result? This one, there's a really obvious one, and it's caused a bit of a discussion, but I'm going to talk about Fallout. Fallout, people just refer to it as isometric, and technically it's not isometric, and I used to call it Cavalier Oblique, and apparently it's not Cavalier Oblique, it's trimetric, or... Not important. Let me explain what I did. Almost every isometric game that had come out, and by that I mean, it's 2D, but it's made of tiles, so it looks like it's 3D. Almost all those, the angle here was 45 degrees, so it was 45 degrees on each side. So it's 45, 90, 45. And that was just done for the obvious reason of you could flip tiles, and it made it very easy to reuse art assets. We didn't do that on Fallout. I made the decision to go, instead of 45, 45, it went 60, 30. So 60 and then 30 over here. The reason for that was we were making things out of hexes, and because that's what the original rule set GURPS was based on. And the hexes were a lot easier to calculate and draw on the screen in a 60-30 set of angles. And the reason for that is because cosine of 60 is 1/2. So it made it very easy to do some quick calculations. Instead of dividing by 2, I could just bit shift and bam, calculation was done. So that's why that's the reason we did it. But surprisingly, it made us look cool in a way that often when people played the game, they couldn't put their finger on why this wasn't looking like other isometric RPG games at the times. I still remember someone in QA, and I don't remember their name, was saying, I don't know why, but I like the look of this game better than Baldur's Gate. I guess it's the art style. And I remember thinking, I bet you it's the angle. It just, something about 60-30 made it look like you had a deeper view into the world. I don't know why. But also because you couldn't flip tiles, there was a lot more unique art being displayed, which probably made us run slower and tear when we scrolled. But it looked really cool, and it made for great screenshots. So that's my time where I broke what was considered a standard rule. Next question is from Adam versus Maxim, who asked, if you had to do a non-RPG genre, what would you like to do? Or if you had to do a different type of RPG, like tactics or JRPG, what would you do differently than there's usually there? Well, that's an interesting question. I think if I did a non-RPG game, I think it's pretty obvious from my toy updates that I would do a space exploration game. I just love space, and I love all the ideas of different planets out there. It could let me use procedural generation, which I'm also a big fan of. It would probably be a survival type game where you either crash on a planet and I procedurally generate it, or maybe you have a ship and you go from planet to planet searching for things, but every planet has its own set of dangers, maybe biological, maybe hazard. I don't know. Haven't really thought about it too much, but I would probably do a space exploration game. It's just kind of in my DNA, and I never really got to make a space exploration game. If I were to do an RPG, I'd be torn. If I did a space exploration RPG, I'd do that, kind of like Star Control 2, and where the player's the ship. So what you're upgrading is the ship, not a particular person. So crew is expendable. Crew is kind of like the hit points of the ship. As long as there's at least one crewman alive, your ship can go. So I'd probably do something like that. But if I were to do a completely different kind of RPG, I would probably go tactical. I used to love XCOM. I used to play a lot of tactical RPGs, mainly in the 90s. I haven't played a lot recently. but I would try to incorporate a learning AI into the opponent. And what I mean by that is when you make builds and you throw them against the AI, it will eventually start making builds to counter the type of builds it sees you making. And if you vary your builds, then it looks for a pattern in how you're varying them. I think that would be fun. I'd have to be careful because one thing I learned doing AI for one of the Star Trek games at Interplay was if the AI is too good, people get mad at it or think it's cheating or something like that. And I wouldn't let it cheat, but I'd really have it do a lot of pattern matching against the players, the builds the players are making. The next question is from Pat Gunn, who asked, what are your favorite characters you've seen in games? I thought about that question for a while, and I don't know how to answer it, so I changed the word favorite to memorable. And I can already tell you that people are going to say, oh, you're going to pick old games. But that's what I want to talk about is there are games I've played recently that I've thought about a bit, but then 6 months later I realized I'm not even thinking about that game anymore. It was not memorable. I had fun. It was well made. It was well designed. It was well written, but something didn't stick in me. So I want to talk about two games that stuck. One was an adventure game from the early to mid 90s called Sam and Max Hit the Road, with Sam the dog and Max the rabbit, and you were running around. Sam was a police officer. Max was just kind of psychotic. I don't know what Max was supposed to be, but it was just such a memorable adventure. I still remember it. I played it 32 years ago, 31, about 30 years ago, probably more. And I still remember a lot of the adventure scenarios we got into. And I still remember one where Sam was interrogating someone at, I think it was one of those Snuckies. The Snuckies restaurants where they served a nut log, which growing up on the East Coast, I knew they were making fun of Stuckies. But Max kept jumping around going, Sam, I got to go to the bathroom. I got to go to the bathroom. I got to go to the bedroom. And you can ignore him, but as soon as you say fine, and he turns to the guy and says, I got to go to the bathroom, and the guy gives him a key, the key is on a keychain, and the keychain is a huge clue to the puzzle you're trying to solve. So I thought that was cute. I thought that was funny. And it stuck. 30 years later, I still remember it. The other characters that I remember super fondly is, I remember when Portal came out. It was super fun. Such a good puzzle game. Well-designed puzzles. I wouldn't say I didn't get stuck, but I never got permanently stuck. If I ever got stuck in something, I thought about it for a while, or I shut down the game, and when I restarted it, I had a solution. But I remember GLaDOS. GLaDOS is such a great character, and you interact with GLaDOS, and it's hilarious. But then on the second game, when they introduced Cave Johnson, which you don't even ever interact with, but he was funny. The things he said were so dark. He would have been a character right at home in Fallout. And when you find out the origin of GLaDOS, it's slightly horrific, and you're like, whoa. So that was very memorable for me, the two Portal games. And then let's do one more. Let's do a question from Wheeze1381, who asked, what's your take on mundane or grounded settings in games? How does that come into play in design choices? As I mentioned in a video I put up called What If, playing What If in settings, I love doing that. And I love taking a mundane game and giving it a spin. If you take just what I would call a plain mundane setting, which is just our world, our modern world, and then just add one thing to it. And by the way, it doesn't have to be superpowers. It doesn't have to be supernatural. It doesn't have to be high tech or aliens or, something like the world is nuked. It can just be something that makes you go, huh. I mean, it could happen. Something that could happen, unlikely. That's a bit of a mystery. I like mystery. The two I thought of immediately were, and these have been explored in other games and books and movies. What if it was just the modern world, but a few years ago, children stopped being born? There have been no children born in years. Or the reverse. All the adults suddenly died. And now, here it is, maybe 15, 20 years later. What would the world be like? You could play a whole what-if scenario with that. What I like about both of these is it gets around that restriction about violence against kids or showing, having kids be vulnerable or whatever. There are no kids in these games. Either it's the modern world, but because kids stop being born and a few years later, all the last kids who were born are young adults, or it's the one where all the adults passed away and it's a few years later, so all the kids that survived are young adults. So you don't have any children. There's an explanation for why there's no children, and there's a mystery to be solved. But the game itself would just be sort of day-to-day survival in a world where civilization is collapsing, but not because someone fired nukes, not because there was a pandemic outbreak, not because, a lot of the standard reasons, just because there are no more children. It's a game of adults running around. There are no kids. Civilization has collapsed. So you get to play this day-to-day survival game, but there's this overarching story to try to solve the mystery of what happened and why this is the case. So, anyway, those are some questions in my question backlog. It was fun to just make a video and try to address those and get ahead of that, get ahead of my queue. I'm sorry, some of these I know have been in my queue for months, but I hope you like the answers.